C5 Corvettes have a reputation for being harder on batteries than most cars. Now, while I think there is some truth to that, I also think part of the problem is how the typical C5 Corvette is used, or more accurately, not used enough. Regardless of the cause, if you get into your C5 Corvette and you try to start it only to find out that the battery is low or worse yet, dead, do you know what to do next? Why today? If not, then watch this video so you will be able to properly diagnose if you've got a bad battery, a bad alternator, excessive parasitic draw, or perhaps you're simply just not driving your C5 often enough. The good news is, this is actually pretty easy to diagnose, and most likely you won't even get your hands dirty. I promise that if you follow the short list of steps that I'm about to demonstrate, then most, if not all of you, should easily be able to diagnose your issue so that you can make an informed decision on how best to proceed. So let's jump right into it and get started.
Toys for life.
Let's start off with the one tool that you must have to be able to proceed with this diagnosis, the very common and useful digital multimeter. If you don't already own a multimeter, then don't worry, because you can pick up one like the one I'll be using today for around $35. And the best part is, this must-have tool will continue to pay dividends down the road as you use it again and again on automotive projects, household projects, and even testing the battery in your lawnmower or your boat. And if you're not sure which one to get, I've got you covered. I'll leave a link to a couple of decent options in the description below. Okay, so we're at the point where you realize your C5 is not going to start. The first thing I would do is turn on the headlights, because they draw a fair amount of juice, and I want to see if they're going to pop up fast like normal, and if they're nice and bright, or if they're going to pop up kind of slow and dim, which would indicate that your battery's got a weak charge. If they do pop up quickly, check to see if you have a loose battery cable, because that is more common than you might think. And if it is loose, go ahead and tighten it up. If you happen to be out and about and you don't have any tools, go ahead and kind of wiggle the battery cable a little bit, because sometimes that's enough to reestablish enough connection to allow enough current to flow so you can get the C5 started and back home. If they do seem to go up kind of slow and they're kind of dim, see if you can find somebody to give you a jump start, because likely that'll be enough to get your C5 back to your garage. All right, so we're back at the garage and it's time to get out our handy dandy multimeter, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it to DC volts, and I'm going to set it to the scale that happens to be just above 14 volts DC, and on my meter that's 20 volts. Next, I'm just going to make sure the headlights and all accessories are off, and then I'll go ahead and touch the red meter lead to the positive side of the battery and the black meter lead to the negative side of the battery, and we'll see what our voltage is. Ideally, it's at least 12.5 volts. If your C5's battery does have 12.5 volts or more, but it still turns over slowly or not at all, it's still possible that your battery is shot, so we're going to test it. Ideally, you would have a dedicated battery load tester, but unfortunately, most of us don't have one of those. Fortunately for us, we have a multimeter, so we can still perform a load test on the C5's battery. Here's how we're going to do it. I'll go ahead and hook my multimeter up like we did before to the battery using alligator clips. Then I'll go ahead and jump in the C5, and I'm going to push and hold the accelerator pedal all the way down to the floor. At the same time, I'll crank the engine over for about 10 seconds or so while we're monitoring the battery voltage. By pushing and holding the accelerator pedal to the floor, that puts the car's computer into what's known as clear flood mode, which will prevent it from actually starting while we're doing the test. A couple of quick things about this test. First, you want to make sure it's at least 60 degrees. Now it's super cold outside, but it's 65 in here, so we're good. Second, this test is using the C5 starter to turn the engine over. That's introducing a pretty demanding load of about 200 amps on our battery. And so while we're monitoring the voltage while we're turning the engine over for 10 seconds, that gives us a really good idea of the strength and health of the battery. And we just want to make sure that voltage never drops below 9.6 volts. If it stays above 9.6, it's deemed to be good. Fortunately for me, mine passes the cranking voltage test, but let's just say yours passes the resting voltage test and the cranking voltage test like mine, but it still turns over really slowly or not at all. Now in reality, there's several reasons that could cause this, but in order to keep this video to a reasonable length and within most people's abilities, I'm going to propose a next step that should fix the majority of times a C5 presents with these symptoms. Warning, what we're going to do next will disconnect your vehicle's power, so if you still have a factory radio that has that GM theft lock feature, you got to make sure you know your code, or you might risk having to go to the dealership to get your radio back on. With that out of the way, I'm going to have you remove both battery cables from the battery, and using a wire brush, you're going to clean the surfaces of the cable and the battery where they go together to make sure there's no signs of any corrosion. Sometimes corrosion is extensive and you might need to use a pick to make sure you get all the corrosion off. So take your time and make sure it's clean. Once you're satisfied that they're clean, go ahead and reconnect the cables, being sure to snug them up properly. C5s are notoriously finicky and picky about fluctuations in battery voltage and current, so make sure you get this right. If you're not sure what snug is, go ahead and use a torque wrench and torque them down to 130 inch-pounds, not foot-pounds, but inch-pounds of torque. Now go ahead and hop in your C5, cross your fingers, and hope it starts. And if it does, you're all done. Now let's go back to that engine cranking voltage test we did just a couple minutes ago. If your battery started out with a resting voltage of 12.5 or above, and during the cranking test it dropped to 9.6 volts or below, then your battery's likely shot. So to be 100% sure, go ahead and remove your battery from your C5, fully charge it, and then bring it to one of the better auto parts stores in your area and use their professional battery tester to check it one more time. Do not skip this part because it's still possible that it could pass, and if that's the case, you likely have some sort of a starter issue or a bad battery cable at the starter, something of that nature. When working on C5s, there's all kinds of scenarios that can present themselves, so let's go back a few steps to where we tested the resting voltage of our C5's battery. If yours tested at 12.4 volts or lower, go ahead and hook up a 10 amp charger or something in that ballpark and go take a short break. A few things to be mindful of when you're charging your C5's battery. Number one, always wear safety glasses because in the unlikely event your battery explodes, your eyes will thank you. Number two, start with your battery charger turned off or unplugged. Connect the red lead to the positive side, the black lead to the negative side. Then go ahead and plug in your battery charger, turn it on. On my battery charger, I can tell if it's taking a charge by looking at the amp meter. And with your battery charger, if you're not sure how to tell, just consult the manual that came with your charger or look it up online. Number three, keep in mind, depending on how dead your battery is, for instance, if it came in at 11.7 volts or so, it can take around 6 hours with a 10 amp charger to bring it up to the full state of charge. This is important because it's also a bad thing to overcharge your battery. So if you're not sure how to tell, consult your manual or remove the charger once in a while. Give it time to settle down a little bit and check the voltage, and when it's around 12.6 or above, be sure to stop. If for some reason your battery refuses to take a charge, then go to your neighbor, your buddy, whoever, and get a known good charger.
Yeah?
And try that on your battery. If it still won't take a charge, then, well, you know. If, however, your battery does successfully take a charge and it's stabilized after a little bit at over 12.5 volts, Now it's your turn to go back and do that engine cranking test we did just a few minutes ago. Now let's fast forward to the point where your C5 is back running again, life is good and you're happy, but in the back of your mind you're not 100% sure why your battery was dead in the first place, so let's see if we can figure that out.